I'm going to just introduce all of the Trinity members of the panel, and I'll pass you over to Katie then to give an introduction to Una, our guest speaker. So we have Gaia Scalabrino. She's the Executive Director of the NAPRO Centre, and that's based in the School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. So I don't know if Gaia, you want to just do a quick hello so that Zoom looks at you, so that
I did.
We've got Peter O'Connell, who's also in the NAPRO Centre in the School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. Hi, Peter.
Hi.
Hi, Peter.
We've got Kathy Gorman, who's the dental technician in the Dublin Dental University Hospital. Kathy. Kathy there.
Yeah.
Technical officer in the School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. There's Trevor. We've got Marina Kaldoff, who's the technical officer in the Cocker Lab in the School of Chemistry.
Hi.
Tallulah Davey, who's a research assistant in the O'Connor Lab in the School of Natural Sciences. And finally, last but not least, we have James Mclaughlin, who's a senior technical officer in the School of Physics.
Fantastic. Nice to be here.
Hi, James.
And it's with pleasure that I get to introduce Dr. Una Fitzgerald from NUIG Galway, and she was the first person ever to receive the My Green Lab cert in Europe. And I will hand it over to you to tell us all about it and give us the tips and tricks behind it.
Will do. I'll do my best. Okay, I'll start sharing my screen. Just a second. Thank you, Katie. I should have put that slide afterwards, but I mean, we all love doing research. Let's love our planet while we're doing it. I mean, you recognize the Giant's Causeway, don't you, in this picture? But that's kind of a common thread through all of the talks that I give about green labs. Like, we all love working in labs. But now we're obviously thinking about the impact on the environment. And thank you, Katie, for bringing me along here today. As you know, I've met others who are doing lab greening in Trinity, so there seems to be great activity going on in Trinity, and I'm going to get back to that later. But my backstory is I'm based at NUIG. I'm a neuroscientist. Sorry, excuse me a sec, because I can't minimize the photos so that I can go back to the arrow. Excuse me one second, because they're blocking my view, the view of my slides, if you see what I mean. So I just need to move that. Okay. Yeah, so I'm a neuroscientist. My main focus of research is actually multiple sclerosis. But I work on other topics to do with the brain and do histology and stuff like this. And also in the last 5 years, I've been working on Parkinson's to an extent. And I have various kind of EU projects that are on the go. And there's just a list of them here. So obviously active in research, but what happened, and the reason I'm here with you today is because in 2018, I read this book called No More Plastic by Martin Doherty. And honestly, it has changed my life. You know, it's kind of almost ridiculous. But having said that, I suppose I was ready for it as well, because it was just a little thing that was picked up at a till in Glasgow, a bookshop in Glasgow, by Martin, who I think is a chef and an author and sort of has lived half his life on a beach in England. But then I started diving into all these books. And I think it's like one of those things where you read so many of these, I feel like I have to go back to the beginning again. And I have not read all of them, but I'm working my way through them, if you like, because it's kind of a topic that will take over your life if you allow it to. But these are people who prominently have featured in my life in the last couple of years since I read that book. And of course, you recognize these names, and I'm going to mention some of them again. But the issue, of course, at the moment, since what's happened in 2020, is that lab greening in general is miles harder, so much harder in our COVID era. And I want to acknowledge that because it's recognized, and it's recognized amongst the community of climate activists, I guess. And there's one climate activism communications group called Climate Outreach. It's started in the UK. I highly recommend that you browse that. It's got a load of free and very useful resources about how to talk about climate change to various different audiences. But I thought it was excellent that they did this report to say, yes, everyone, the whole world is focused on COVID and our COVID crisis, but we haven't forgotten about the climate. You know, that climate crisis still exists. So it is hard. And organizations like Oceans Asia have been, of course, tracking the various PPE equipment that have been washing up on the beaches around the world. Another thing that came out during the summer last year, and I don't know if any of you caught it, it was the program by Channel 4 that was broadcast about the conditions under which gloves were being made in a factory in Malaysia. And I learned that Top Glove is a factory that makes 2/3 of the world's gloves. So I think we can probably assume that some of those gloves are actually in our labs in Ireland. So even after COVID had started, these people were in crowded conditions, and I think, you know, it's not good, but it raised the whole issue of working conditions of lab products, I guess, you know, and I think maybe now is the time to start asking, you know, what's the provenance of our labware? What's the provenance of our lab equipment? Where is it made? Who's making it? Is there slave labor involved in making any of our lab equipment? Why don't we have a fair trade label, an equivalent for lab equipment? So I think these are kind of questions that we actually need to start asking, especially once you get into kind of the environmental area and you start learning about it. It's all connected with equity, you know, so they're all connected: equity, the environment, the economy, you know. So I think those are really important questions that we should as a community be raising right now. And then of course, you know, what do we feel, or how do you feel about the plastic waste in particular, or the waste in general that's generated in our labs? I made this slide a couple of years ago and I've been revising this figure here. If you go to the EPA website, you can find very, very detailed information about Irish waste. It's actually excellent. This figure used to be 61 kilograms. So our average kilogram waste per person in Ireland is trending downwards, which is good. This is the latest figure, or the only figure I have for US waste. I think it's very big, obviously, 4 times the amount. US, and it's mostly plastic packaging we're talking about here. But from a study that was done in the University of Exeter, basically just under 1,000 kilos of plastic waste were generated per person in their lab in an institute. So in their lab of 280 workers, or 280 people in the institute. So that's fairly shocking. So we do have a lab plastic problem. I think you understand that, or you wouldn't be here. But I've called it kind of plastic creep because I've been around labs for a long time. When I was a postdoc, when I was a student at Strathclyde and a postdoc in Glasgow Uni, I was using Glassware in a very well known, in the Beatson Institute in Glasgow, and we did research okay, you know. But I think this generation is kind of scared of using it. And I do believe that as a community. Oh, sugar! That's playing a recorded. Okay, never mind that. Sorry. Ah. Okay, hold on a second. I need to exit here. Excuse me. Sorry. Just to say there was that you know, it obviously plastics and all of the waste associated with the labs is a problem. But I do think that as a community of lab workers, that we actually have an opportunity, more so than maybe the average person in the street, to do something about the climate crisis. And I would pose a question then to everyone here today: what is your dream green lab? In other words, you need to have a personal vision for what it would look like so that you can try and work towards doing it. As I said, I'm based in Galway. I don't know how many of you know the NUIG campus. Here's the old quad, and our biomedical sciences research building is way up here in the corner. And the particular lab that was certified as green is the Curran lab, the SFI-funded Curran Centre for Research on Medical Devices. And there are a number of other big labs in the same building, the kind of 5 big wings here. And I want to acknowledge this green team up front who did all the hard work in getting towards our Green Lab certification. We got a bit of funding from an Explorer scheme on campus. The rest of the top row here, they were 4th year PhD students at the time, so they were really, really busy. Jill McMahon is a senior researcher in my lab. Lena and Oliver are 2 techs that were involved. Maciek is a graphic artist who was also very important for our kind of branding. And James Britton, another PhD student, and then Apleona, a facilities management company. He sort of is the rep from that company, and that helps to run the building. I don't have time to go into why I picked my green lab, but one of the main reasons is because it's a non-profit organization. And I think you probably know already that the main themes covered under my green lab, you could divide them under energy, chemicals, water, and waste. And if you go online now, this is the kind of thing you'll see on their website, that there are a number of questions that you have to answer, and they cover all of these categories listed here. So I think some of you know this already and you've started on this process. And when we went and answered the questions under each of these categories, that you can see all along here. Our average score under these categories after answering those kind of statement style questions was 37. And in order to get certification, sort of the first entry level certification, you need to get 40% on average, all right? So then you work with My Green Lab over 6 to 8 months and you get your certification. That's kind of how it goes. You don't just, you know, if you get over 40, you don't instantly get certification. You have to demonstrate that you have a real program embedded in your lab. So we were really, really happy when we more than doubled our score. And we did make a big deal out of it because I was advised to do that because it just happened to be the first lab in Europe that was certified by this American organization. There are, of course, Green Lab programs that do exist already in the UK. But I had looked at those ones and I preferred the My Green Lab one, that's in short. And then there are links to this a documentary about that. And there have been a couple of ripple effects that I do want to mention today. National interest, like the way I'm here today, and invitations from outside Ireland as well. But one key thing actually was that I then became chair of SEAI's working group for public sector labs. And at the beginning it contained 9 members, but now starting with NUIG, you know, these other third levels institutions have joined, which is great. And we hope in the last week in April that we will be ready to launch. We may not now, but we might, around then, we might be launching Irish Green Labs Network. So you'll certainly be hearing about that. So the website is under development and we'll be looking for contributions from all the participants, which of course includes TCD. But the other thing that's happened just recently, and the reason I'm kind of a bit, you know, slightly chaotic today is because at 1 o'clock I was submitting the first progress report to Science Foundation Ireland, because from the 1st of January, we've been funded as one of 10 projects under SFI's Plastic Challenge. And it's called here, Green Lab Services GLOS, we're calling it. And so we had the first report today. I mean, we only started in the middle of January, so it's less than 7 weeks or something since we started. But one of the things we did for this report actually, so this is literally like some of the graphs I'm showing you here, I've only put together in the last few hours, you know, or in the last day. This is an image of a plastic weighing exercise that I had some students go through during the week of the 15th to the 19th of February. And these were weights that were collected and I kind of extrapolated to pre-COVID times, right? So we're only working at a quarter capacity. So the weights that I got for that week, I've multiplied by 4, right? And this is, you probably can't read this very well, but basically I wanted to let you know that we sent a survey out a couple of weeks ago, it's about 3 weeks ago, and over 2 weeks we got 147 respondents who filled in the survey for us, and we're extremely grateful. And these people were based in over 60 public sector labs. And if you're one of those people that completed the survey, I'm really, really grateful. But there were 10 labs from Trinity that actually responded, which I was really, really happy with. And I just did a screen grab there of the Excel sheet before, literally like 20 minutes before joining here, so that you might recognize some of these labs who did participate in the survey. And we will continue to collect that kind of information. So if you think you've missed it, you know, we will be circulating either the same one again, or if you still want to fill out the survey, we still have to do a pitch later on in March. And so we'll be updating our data. But this shows you the location of the respondents were in mostly the university sector, but also some from the IT, a few of the ITs, HSE, Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, the Marine Institute, Chagas, State Labs, and then this other category as well. And then there were various attitudes, which we don't have time to read here, but basically various attitudes to plastic waste. I mentioned the amount per person that was based on one research, or a couple of researchers in Gorman. And then the different kinds, you know, types of labs that did reply, staff from different labs. And then the top single-use plasticware we did, I don't think you'd be surprised, gloves, pipette tips, tubes, EPIs, tip boxes, and then your polystyrene ones. So the grey are polypropylene, and then polystyrene items, the multi-well plates, the Petri dishes, the TC flasks. So you'd recognize all of those. And then the various barriers that people were expressing in terms of reducing lab plastics. So the reason I'm actually throwing those in, I'm kind of hijacking the time a bit. I do want to recruit volunteers to do more weighing. So if you are willing, or if you're willing to say to anyone in your lab, you know, there's a plastic waste weighing exercise going on, I'd be delighted if next week, literally during the next week, you were willing to weigh your plastic waste. So basically take everything that you generate, put it in a plastic bag, and at the end of the day, weigh it. And then ideally categorize it and say what's in it, the supplier, you know, it's mostly Sarsted, isn't it? You know, or Fisher or something like that. And then the catalog number so we can identify the polymer. We can probably guess it at this stage because we're pretty knowledgeable by now. But if anyone is willing to volunteer, I'd be delighted, and you can get back to me. A second ripple effect that I just want to make you aware of is that, you know, we were getting some pushback when we were going into labs. Some of the labs, I mean, the reason only one of the wings got certified was because slight bit of pushback from some of the others. And a typical kind of pushback is that people say, well, you know, what can we do? You know, we're just one person in one small lab in a small country, you know, that sort of thing, and this isn't going to have much impact, so I'm not going to bother, kind of thing. And then I was wondering, why does this happen, you know? And for that reason, we started trying to understand people's attitudes and behaviors and that sort of thing. So, or maybe I thought that maybe people didn't know what the impact was of what they were using or what they were handling or where it came from. So we developed a graduate module on Green Lab principles and practice, and that's offered now to structured PhDs and to a range of master's programs. So it's actually, I've just finished offering the content for the second time, first semester, and those students are now engaged in an assignment activity as well for the second semester. So it's spread over 2 semesters. But it's kind of like a light touch, you know, climate change 101, where the students learn about atmosphere and climate change, sustainability, the SDGs, sustainability metrics, biodiversity ecosystems, all of these topics here, just to give, especially people in the life sciences sector, you know, who maybe have never had a chance to learn anything decent, you know, about the environment. You're only just picking it up kind of randomly from the papers, and it's not really enough if you're embarking as a Green Lab ambassador or someone who's actually having to talk to people about the climate or about climate impact or what they're doing. You need a kind of a firm footing. So that's one of the reasons we came up with the module. And if you want to hear more about it, you can get back to me. So as I mentioned earlier, the challenges, were like attitudes to climate change, awareness of individual responsibilities, cost is always mentioned, the cost of certification, which I think is not expensive, so I wouldn't let that put you off. Procurement is always an issue. And then different labs have different people in charge, different practices, protocols, different pressures. So those are things that you have to kind of encounter. I always recommend that you have senior people on board in the beginning, but I think you have that already, judging by the attendees today. So I think that's pretty good. And then setting up a green team in each lab is one way to go. Having a mixture of staff from all levels, and then distributing tasks amongst the members. So we can talk about that in the Q&A. Just go ahead and register if you haven't already, and then have the green team meetings to work through those kind of statement questions and try and improve your scores. So I do wish you luck if any of you are already embarked on a Green Lab program. And I thank you very much for listening, and I'm very happy to take questions now. And apologies for those, not taking away those recordings. That was annoying. So I think I can come out now and stop sharing. Okay.
I think, Katie, are we going to do a very quick kind of round the room just to get a feel for where everybody is already with their Green Lab journey?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Katie was asking me to host it in some way, and I know I've rattled through all of that, and I hope it wasn't too fast,
No,
and that it was at least semi-coherent. But I've actually been at my desk since 7:30, and it's a Friday afternoon, and that SFI report and all that sort of thing. But
just had one question for you, Una, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, I had more than one, but one.
I'll upload for you as well. So.
can we share your email details with people that potentially want to volunteer to be part of the weighing process?
Please do. Like, really, it would make me very, very happy, because we really need the data. So, you know, for me to extrapolate to the whole of Ireland, which I did with that graph, you know, from weights over one, you know, a collection exercise over 5 days by 2 students, you know, that's like, it's a pretty rough approximation, you know. And Trinity is a much more, you know, they've been at this sort of thing a lot longer than NUIG. And also, I think, depending even on the level of your students, you know, a 4th year is going to be making more plastic than a 1st year, you know, like, because they're in a big hurry, you know, so.
So in no particular order, we're just going to go around and speak to our panelists about their Green Lab experience. Some of them have entered the Green Lab competition that we held here in TCD, which is great. And then others are from more diverse labs that are taking on their own green initiatives. So they're each going to tell us just a bit about their labs. Just because I see Trevor first, do you mind kicking off? Trevor, thanks a million.
Hi, so my name is Trevor. I'm a senior technical officer in the School of Pharmacy. We teach around 250 students a week during term time on medicinal compounds and mixing, all the very basics which they need to use in 1st year and 2nd year. Now, my background originally is I have a degree in polymer engineering and science. So thank you, Una, for your talk. It's very informative again. I have all the, you know, the parts here which we tend to use on a weekly basis and unfortunately throw them out. So as part of my input, I'd like to learn other ways we can recycle this plastic as it goes forward, or possibly maybe we can talk to Una later if there's an option of using biodegradable plastics as an option instead of just the normal plastics, but we can go into that later.
So then if we move on to Gia, if that's okay, just tell us a bit about your lab and your experience to date and maybe some of the principles that you're
where are we implementing. So again, Una, thanks a million for the talk. I heard a lot about you, so nice to finally meet you. So I work as the executive director of the NatPro Center based at the School of Pharmacy, and the NatPro Center is the Center of Natural Product Research. And I only joined Trinity in the last summer to really set up the center. So we're very new in Trinity in general, but obviously in this process. And I think for me, maybe what I would say is that this started as a personal interest. So I grew up in Africa, in East Africa, in Kenya, and obviously in the 70s and 80s, as a toddler, I was thrown at the back of a jeep and driving in the savannah, looking for elephant and lions. I was on the coast on the Indian Ocean, and diving with beautiful coral reefs, and I had the opportunity to connect with communities where waste is not an option, where energy and water are a luxury. So obviously this for me was my drive. There is a beautiful saying in Africa that says something like, we don't inherit our land from our ancestors, but we're borrowing it from our children. And I think that says it all. It's the respect we should have and we don't have for nature. It's what sort of wanted me to be able to live as green as I could be in my private life, and obviously now with the opportunity to set up a center to absolutely, find my responsibility to do it through the center. And the center itself as well, it's perfectly positioned for this because we practically look at plants, we look at seaweeds, and we, different type of natural products. And we search for the bioactives into the natural products and ideally transform them into a potential therapeutics, into a potential functional food or cosmetics. So doing it, that's obviously reflects to try to do that as green as we can possibly do it. So this was our initial drive. And the reason why I'm even just mentioning this is because I think the first step in any change, and especially changes that are hard like this one, I think the first step is that everybody should have a purpose or finding a value. So if it's you promoting the Green Lab within your own experience, or if it's somebody else saying, come on guys, we need to do this, and maybe you're not the person encouraging it, you really have to find a reason of why you should contribute. And I think this is very important. So for me, it's part of the implementation, because it's the core, is the first step to get to that. So when I first joined Trinity last summer, I got in touch with Michelle Hallahan, who is the TCD Sustainable Advisor. And she put me in contact with Camilla Rosselli. Camilla Rosselli is a PhD in neuroscience. And through her, she obviously spoke to me straight away about Una, and she spoke to me about my Green Lab. And I would say she's the one who championed this within Trinity, in the sense that she managed to get Trinity as an institutional member of my Green Lab. So I saw it already as an opportunity for myself and, you know, people in the audience to, okay, this is somebody already ticked that box, so we can just now think about how to do it. So I contacted my Green Lab, who's based in US, in California. I had a good chat with them. They were very open, so I had a lot of questions. So actually, they allowed me to have just Zooms, and we had a good chat with them and really open discussion. And I thought, okay, this is a good fit for us. I'm happy to progress with this. And so we did. Obviously, the way we are quite new, as I said, and for me, the way I started it, I said, okay, I have the opportunity to start it from scratch. So I actually made it part of our induction. So whenever a new team member, new researcher comes on board, part of the induction that I give for the center, for the school, for Trinity, I also included now, you know, my Green Lab in general, so that my goal is that it becomes a cultural aspect of the center, that you know, we really embrace it personally. And the second step that I took was to identify a responsible person within the lab. I'm not working in the lab, so there is no point that of course I want to engage in everything, and I want to be involved, but I'm not going to be the one doing the action. So I need to have, you know, the lab to be embraced in this. And so I thought it was really important to have one responsible leader that could drive this in the lab. And that's Peter actually here, that is on the panel as well. So he will talk more about all this because he's the leader implementing it. But I think this is the two first things that we did. And then we did our assessment, and we had a good team meeting to discuss, you know, the results of the first assessment, which is just a baseline, and then how we want to work towards our goals and accreditation. And as well, another simple step that I think for me is very important from a cultural perspective is that we have team meetings every week. And again, my Green Lab is part of those team meetings. So I really want it to be part of our culture. And I think it's also because it's not only about work or about what you do at home. If you do it in work, if you're switching on that computer, if you're closing the water, you will do it at home as well. So it's to try really to make the change as a real change. But maybe in terms of implementation, Peter, I pass it on to you. You obviously know much more than me about this.
Yeah, so as Gaia mentioned, in the Natural Centre, we undertook the initial questionnaire from My Green Labs back in January, received the feedback within a couple of weeks. And again, compared to where Una was, we got somewhere in the region of 50 to 60%. So that gave us a good baseline on where we needed to look at. So again, they highlighted key concerns for us. So they were obviously infrastructure, general energy, cold storage, procurement, and green chemistry. So again, there we're obviously going to put our main focus on at the moment. And again, within that, there's obviously certain things that are what we'll call low-hanging fruit, that are easy to fix and remedy. And then we sort of apply that to the type of work we're doing. And one of our core activities is going to be extracting the biotherapeutic compounds from natural products. So we're focusing on green chemistry. So our traditional and our original modus operandi would have been solvent extraction. So again, simple extractions could be taking 3 liters of methanol. You know, so it's a lot of extraction for a lot of solvents for large amounts of material, for relatively small amounts of material. So when it comes to that, we're looking at alternatives, and then within our procurement, then we're sort of identifying, is there certain equipment we can use or purchase that would actually help us to do that. So again, we've identifying components, and again, an interesting side aspect here is that there's sort of been a bit of growth in here, and it's mainly been driven by the cannabis industry, because the extraction of the cannabis plants is sort of similar to what we're doing, and again, because it's being commercialized, the products are actually much more readily available, and they've actually become cheaper. So that's something where we could actually identify. So not using solvent extraction or using sort of more pressurized systems, sort of supercritical fluid extractions and things like that. So we've identified sort of the equipment we need to use and how we can actually reduce our solvent needs and chemistry techniques. And then obviously traditional solvent extraction, we're thinking water-based condensing, so single pass units there. So we looked at sort of getting recirculating chillers with manifolds so that we can run 3 rotary evaporators off a single chiller, and we can do them all in parallel and things like that. So then that's just simple identification of what we actually look to do. Staying on the procurement side of things, obviously some of the analytical equipment, we needed to purchase some new equipment, and we sort of looked into My Green Labs and where they have identified sort of an eco label for equipment. So it's called their ACT program, and it sort of accounts to accountability, consistency, and transparency. And it wasn't the key driver on selecting a piece of equipment, but it became part of the discussion. So actually one of our key pieces actually has this ACT label. So it's always nice to be able to see it. So it's a GPC from Agilent. So that was actually sort of something where we were able to identify. And even though all of the suppliers haven't adopted ACT, I've now sort of from that sort of seen the key aspects of any sort of ACT label that's practical. And there's sort of questions I'll bring into other discussions with other suppliers that may not be part of the ACT program, but we can sort of use that as a way of sort of seeing suitability. So it's based upon how the equipment is manufactured, how it's going to be shipped, its serviceability, its energy requirements, and its end of life suitability. So can it be returned and recycled or units like that. Within procurement, again, while we're a new centre, there was obviously a lot of things that maybe needed to be purchased. But as I'd already been in the School of Pharmacy for about 6 years, I developed sort of a knowledge of what other groups had. And so I was able to identify, can we get shared access to equipment rather than having to buy something new that was going to sit in a corner and only be used over a short period of time and not all of the time. So we're sort of in discussions with other PIs about shared access to equipment, and then we might purchase something that other groups would allow to use. The third aspect on procurement that we sort of looked at as well was legacy old instruments. Can we actually keep them alive and keep them working rather than having to spend and bring in new stuff and generate and essentially send old equipment to landfill or disposal? So we've identified some equipment that is perfectly fine, a full service, and we're able to get it up and running again. Upgrade software so that it's usable on a modern computer. So those sort of things are sort of small aspects that we've looked at, and we've tried to identify ways of minimizing the need for purchasing expensive equipment or sort of large items as well. So that's where we are at the moment. And again, obviously we need a bit of some of the other aspects that were identified under the certification. Sort of we need to liaise more with the college facilities, because again, some of them are sort of higher level infrastructure issues, so that whereas we couldn't sort of make demands on air conditioning because they may be tied into other labs. We're not in a single wing, so therefore other labs may be dependent on electricity or water, power, and other items. So therefore we couldn't ask everything to be turned off at certain periods. So we can only control the things within our labs at the moment. So some of the other issues are sort of outside our control at the moment, but with a bigger push within the college, maybe we can actually get some more energy efficient options on some of those. So that sort of gives a brief situation of where we are in the NACPRO lab at the moment.
And Peter, you also did this, you applied for you trained for the ambassadors role as well within the My Green Lab. So that's brilliant because, you know, as well, we got a little bit more knowledge in that, just in terms of awareness. Yeah.
So just in case anyone wasn't aware, so My Green Lab offer a free a Green Lab ambassador certification, which is for individuals, and you can just sign up to take it, and it just gives a grounding on sort of Green Lab principles and operations. And again, it just takes maybe probably 2.5 hours to go through. And then it gives you sort of a sort of wealth of information, but it also gives you access to a secret group whereby they share informal information as well that can be used within your research center then.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're just going to thank you so much for that. That's really helpful to have all that background information. We're going to move on to Marina, who was the winner of the popular vote for the My Green Lab competition, and she can tell us a bit more about her lab. Please note though that some labs are well on their way in their journey and other labs were just starting out, so bear that in mind. Marina, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, Katie. Hi, my name is Marina Kaldoff and I'm a technical officer in the Cocker Teaching Laboratory in the School of Chemistry. And we currently teach first, second, third year chemistry students in inorganic and organic chemistry practicals. And I'm currently the lab's green champion for the start of the My Green Lab process. And I'm interested in becoming a Green Lab ambassador eventually as we start our journey. And for our lab and the staff of the lab, we want to reduce our lab's overall environmental footprint. We want to learn what sustainable actions we can adopt. We would like to gauge how sustainably we're currently operating as a busy undergraduate teaching lab. And this will help identify any issues that we might be blind to or we mightn't realize that we should be working a bit more efficiently and a bit more green. And I think this will help improve our confidence going forward in terms of reaching the Green Lab certification. And we feel that the certification would set a baseline precedent from which examples of change can be embedded in the school culture. And we think that like members of the technical staff in the Cocker Lab can be a driving force in this area, in the college overall, and as we're all a permanent cohort of staff, we can maintain the required culture of change going forward. And we already have a few green initiatives that are ongoing in the lab, such as our energy conservation. We don't, as a teaching lab, we don't have a whole lot of equipment on 5 days a week, so it's only based on the usage for the practicals in question. So fume hoods are only used and sashes open when the students are working in them. So they're closed and shut and turned off, or the lights are turned off, or when the students aren't in labs. We try and turn off any taps when they're not in use. We try to shut down, power off all equipment and computers and electricity when not in use. And we, when washing glassware, we try to fill up all the glass washers to a full capacity for each wash. There's a few things that we can improve upon. As a busy organic and inorganic chemistry teaching lab, we use a lot of water for running distillations and running the rotary evaporators and running condensers. So our water consumption is quite high. I think that's one of our main challenges to become more green on. And we're currently looking into sourcing coolant pumps or waterless condensers for the practicals. And because we have currently use single pass-through water systems for each student's condenser apparatus or distillation apparatus, and you could have 30 students at a time during the pandemic in the lab, so there's 30 condensers running at any one time. So that's something that I think make a big difference if we can get our water consumption down. I think that's a big challenge. And also we have water distillation apparatus and water deionizing apparatus in for the students to use deionized distilled water. So we will look at improving how we distill and deionize the water to use less energy. But also we don't use a whole lot of single-use plastics or plastic equipment. Luckily in our lab we have a lot of glass pipettes and glass equipment that's reused. So on that front we do well, but we're looking into like reducing the overall chemical waste and exploring green solvents for the undergraduate practicals going forward. So yeah, that's where we're at. We're only at the start of our journey, but I'm looking forward to starting the green culture within the lab and just instilling it in the students, the importance of the My Green Lab's behaviours, and for them to go on in the future in their careers to be more sustainable. So I'm very happy to be the Green Lab champion for Cocker Lab.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. So moving on to another undergraduate teaching lab, the volume of students alone really highlighted just the great initiatives that you already have going on, but also how many people pass through your corridors every day. So staying on the theme of Faculty of STEM undergraduate labs, we're going to move on to James, please, if you tell us a bit about your lab and your background and some of the green initiatives that you're doing in your lab.
Thanks, Katie. How are you, Una? Thanks for your presentation, very interesting. So first of all, my name is James Mclaughlin. I'm a senior technical officer in the School of Physics in the undergraduate lab. So we see about over 500 students per year pass through our lab. So we have a lot of access to students. So that's a good thing about in talking about green labs. But I think where Green Labs comes to play within our lab is we try and promote a safe and healthy environment for staff and students. So we piggybacked on top of Green Labs, trying to get involved in it. We're at a very early stage of the Green Labs. So I suppose creating awareness of what we can do in our lab to save energy, to reduce waste, is a great incentive when it comes to Green Labs. But what we currently do is we have a few incentives in the lab, but rather than individually or a group of us just decide to implement them, why not piggyback on something like Green Labs and promote it and make everybody more aware, and then at the end of it get something out of it, to say, hey, we've done a great job here, and not only are we safe and healthier environment, we have this certificate and we are helping the environment and ultimately securing a future in terms of reducing our waste and promoting awareness. So some of the incentives we have is we try and promote paperless, so reducing whatever photocopying, and in terms of being in a working environment and living at home, we tend to steer more, doing things for ourselves at home. So everybody's quite aware that if you put in an LED bulb in your house, you're effectively saving energy and also saving yourself a few coins in your pocket. But when we come to work, we are quite happy to turn every light on in the building for one person to be in the building. So we don't even know who's paying for that electricity. We don't even know how much that unit per energy is costing. So I think to promote awareness, so we've a policy, like a last to leave policy. So like the other people on the panel, we turn off standby and we make sure things are plugged out. Also for safety as well, you know, hot plates, you know, for fire hazard, but also a hot plate uses a lot of energy. So there's a number of factors what we do there. Now, recycling and reusing is a big thing. It's quite easy to do. We don't use a lot of plastics, but as Una said, if we collected it all per week and weighed it, we might be surprised. I'm not going to say presently like overly surprised, but at least we could say, hey, here we go, this is what we have thrown away effectively. What we try to do is, there's numerous technical staff here, so we try and combine orders. So if somebody was going to order something from a supplier or a vendor, we might go in to each other and say, hey, I'm doing an order today, and it's as simple as casual. But if we put that in place in a Green Labs policy, you know, it would make it work better. And what we'd see is less delivery to the site, to the campus. At home, we plan to just order something from Amazon, and if you forget to place an order for something, you do it again the next day. Little do we realize, you know, the implications, packaging, you know, and how we get there. So I think what we're looking to get out of Green Labs is, especially the big hitters, or as other people on the panel have said, the low-hanging fruit. So it's quite easy to think about it. So we come to work, the heat's on in work. The first thing we do is open the window because we have no access to turning off the heat. So we're using energy. But at home, you would never even dream of doing that. The first thing you would do is turn off the heat. So things like that, lighting, heating, recycling. So I think that's what we're looking at to get out of this Green Labs initiative. So I think there's a few challenges involved, and especially just what I'm after mentioning there. So ownership is a big thing. So on top of just me trying to apply all these initiatives, or a couple of technical staff, I think if you create an entire environment that this is a Green Labs area, lab, school, whatever building, you know, you create that awareness, and then the ownership moves from myself and the other technical staff onto the lab user, the students, the researchers, and so on. But I do think funding is a big thing, you know, when it comes to it. So you know, I can have all these dreams and try and make up all these initiatives and policies, but you know, funding to come in on the back of that is a big thing. So so I'm looking forward to applying for the Green Labs certificate and moving along. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, James. And that moves us nicely along to Tallulah, who won for the research lab. She works with Dr. O'Connor. She's at the forefront of it. So she can tell us a bit about what it's like on the ground floor of her lab and some initiatives that they brought in and what they hope for the future.
Yeah, so kind of like Marina said, we're at the start of our Green Lab journey, but first and foremost, I want to say, you know, thanks, Una, for the great talk, and thanks to the Faculty of STEM for the opportunity to be here. Our lab's delighted to be starting our My Green Lab journey, and it's kind of great hearing all of your experiences about making your labs more sustainable. I'm Tallulah. I'm a research assistant on Professor Nessa O'Connor's team in the zoology department, where we have a marine mesocosm lab, which is made up of 96 seawater tanks, which we use to investigate effects of climate change. So things like ocean warming and acidification on marine species and marine resources. So we applied for the My Green Lab funding because while understanding climate change effects and climate change mitigation is at the forefront of our research, we wanted to be able to reflect this in our daily lab practices too, and reduce our own contributions to the problem. And our lab is also soon going to be relocated to facilitate building works in the basement that it is currently. So it kind of seemed like the perfect opportunity to implement a more sustainable footprint in the new location. So in terms of initiatives that we have in place at the moment, there's a couple of things that we do. So we reduce waste by reusing and upcycling. So things like experimental components, hard plastics, tube offcuts, ropes, we keep them all aside for future experiments. We try to reduce using single-use plastics by wearing reusable rubber gloves. And we also just wash and reuse consumables like pipette tips, sampling jars, plastic sampling bags. Any excess organic matter from our experiments, like seaweeds, we return to the shore after use. So to reduce water waste, we run our experiments long term. Is the use of seawater and freshwater is quite considerable to fill 96 tanks, and then also the subsequent cleaning of them after an experiment. And then the energy involved in the actual cooling process of the seawater to natural shore conditions is really significant. So we try and mitigate this energy consumption by switching off water chillers, air cons, fans between experiments. And then during the actual running of our experiments, we keep room temperatures as low as possible to reduce the energy needed to cool the water. Even if this means we have to wrap up in gloves, hats, scarves, woolly jumpers throughout our experiments. We also try to manage our lab inventory quite tightly so that we don't make unnecessary purchases, and we consult with other labs in the zoology department first to see if it's a possibility of a loan. But in terms of things we're kind of hoping to improve upon, the main aspect is definitely power usage involved in cooling the seawater and the whole room. There's quite a heavy plug load from 3 industrial-sized beer chillers, air conditioning units, and fans, in addition to actually the lighting and the recirculating of the tank water. So in the new lab location, I think we really want to focus on ways that we can insulate the room to keep room temperatures down. So we might not even need to power on air conditioners or fans during the experiments. And then we also want to eliminate single-use plastics from our lab and increase our knowledge of sustainable procurement, kind of like it's set out in Trinity's sustainable procurement policies. We want to be buying products with less packaging through suppliers that are committed to a more sustainable criteria. And we kind of want to encourage everybody to be familiarized with these useful resources that are actually available, like the Trinity Green Labs guide that also came out recently. So I suppose just one thing that we really do hope to implement is putting a green perspective at the forefront of our research rather than putting our research first, which is probably the most difficult thing to kind of implement. As researchers, we're under tight time constraints, and it's hard not to choose the most convenient path to conducting an experiment rather than the more sustainable one. But I think this is something that will become, easier in time the more we familiarize ourselves with green alternatives. So yeah, we're at the start of our Green Lab journey, but it's great to hear all of your lab's perspectives and suggestions, and I'm looking forward to engaging with you along our green journey.
Thank you so much for that. And now for a different taste of lab, Kathy's going to tell us, very briefly about her lab, and then we'll move on to question and answers. Thank you very much. Kathy, over to you.
Thanks very much. So my name is Catherine Gorman. I'm the course director for dental technology here in the dental school. The school trains all members of the dental team, including dentists, hygienists, dental technicians, nurses, and so on. I must admit I'm very new to the idea of green labs, but I very much subscribe to the concept of waste reduction and recycling. So I'm responsible for a small teaching laboratory for training dental laboratory technicians. There would be a maximum of 12 students using the laboratory at any one time. It's not a laboratory in the traditional sense, in that it doesn't have a very heavy chemical usage, and we're not conducting experiments, so it's not a research-based lab. I suppose it's more akin to a workshop where students are trained in fabrication techniques for the manufacture of dental prostheses. And these are also classified as medical devices, such as dentures, crowns, veneers, implants, orthodontic appliances, etc. So this involves the use of a very wide range of materials, which ranges from acrylics, metals, waxes, ceramics, etc. I do have an annual budget from which to run this program, so I'd be very conscious of waste from a financial perspective. I suppose some of the things that we have in the lab that reduce waste is some of the equipment actually has energy saving modes, which when they're not in use, they save energy when they're not in use if they're put on energy saving mode. So I suppose the equipment manufacturers have a part to play here also. Other little things we do is we switch from disposable scalpels to metal scalpel handles with disposable blades, little things I suppose, and stuff like our materials are delivered in boxes and containers, so rather than chuck them in the bin, we'd often repurpose them for different uses around the laboratory or offer them to the students for their own use too. And other things like whoever's last to leave the lab should make sure all of the equipment is turned off, small things like that. One big thing we notice is that students tend to generate an excess of dental appliances, which once they're finished, because they're not intended for patient use during the first year or two of their training, they're only fit for the bin. So I'd keep some of these as teaching aids to other programs in the dental school. For instance, the dental technology students produce a large volume of orthodontic appliances during the first 2 years of their program. So some of them will want to keep some of these themselves. However, the majority of them are destined for the bin. So another program in the dental school trains orthodontic therapists, and they use these excess appliances to practice bending clasps, etc. Ultimately, they break them and they end up in the bin, but at least they've served a dual purpose. I suppose one aspect I'm particularly concerned about, and I find very, very wasteful in the laboratory, is our consumption of rubber gloves in our industry. I would be very interested to learn of ways to recycle these. However, our industry is changing rapidly at the moment, and our manufacturing processes are becoming more automated and computer dependent. So inherently, I suppose this will give rise to greater energy consumption in the long run. So it's an interesting time to be moving forward in the industry, whilst at the same time looking at opportunities to be mindful of and reduce waste in this area in the future. Thank you.
Thank you all for that today. And I think we could all speak for another hour on this topic. But I just have one question from Michael from the audience directed to Una. So could you please describe briefly your experience with the funding bodies on this issue? And does being green mean more cost in terms of materials and staff effort and time? And if so, are the funding bodies consistent with the need to be supported financially?
Yeah. Hi, Michael. Thanks for the question. Yeah, the funding bodies are aware. In fact, as soon as the certification happened, I think, yeah, I mean, Alison Paradise, when she came over to look at the lab, next thing we were up at the SFI summit, and after that, actually, the January after that, so that was January last year. I was asked to go up to SFI and talk to a couple of people there. So they actually are considering. And I'm hoping they're actually going to do with it. I haven't caught up with them yet on this, but that they'll be making it a requirement for their funding, you know, for the labs funded by SFI, that they should have a green lab program in place, right? And of course, that's what I was pushing for, but then I have it, you know, so it was easy for me to say that. But I think it is really important for the funders to play a role in this. It's a bit like integrity, because I mean, SFI was requiring that the researchers take some kind of a course or a workshop or something on integrity, research integrity. So it's like an extension of integrity, really, because we're just incorporating the environment as well, you know. So yes, the funders, could you describe briefly your experience with the funding bodies on the issue? So in terms of my experience with them is, they haven't started in Ireland to require that the certification should be in place, but I think it's coming, you know. And so when I was there talking to the people in SFI, it was like, maybe they would require within X number of years. You know, they can't just say you need to have this next week, you know, but that there's a pledge from the groups that they would start to engage with the process and demonstrate some kind of acknowledgement of the amount of waste and stuff like that that's generated in the labs. And then the second thing about cost, I mean, this is a key response, or it's a very normal response that people have. I think that it can be balanced by better practices in relation to plastics. I'd love to know now in Trinity if people were really, really honest about things like art tips, you know, or using sterile serological pipettes in a big lab when they don't need to. Like, I mean, I suspect that in really well-funded labs, costs could come down a lot, and they would more than pay for alternatives to the practices like glassware, you know. And the glassware, you know, when you wash it X number of times, it is going to pay for itself. Yes, it is more expensive. The issue in Ireland, as I've discovered from that survey, is that people, you know, the systems really aren't in place. They're not well defined. They're very variable across the different labs. People are reluctant. People don't want to wash their stuff, you know, and that's why we're proposing a Green Lab Services enterprise, that we would take that pain away from labs where appropriate, you know, that we might take their stuff away and wash it and bring it back. That's one aspect of the idea, at any rate. And the second is to do with the recycling, which Trevor was asking about in the very beginning. You know, do we have access to biodegradable plastics? I haven't seen any of that within Labware at all anywhere. Like, I'm looking for it, you know, I am looking for it. It's, I think that the biodegradable, there's a difference between bioplastics and biodegradable plastics, which I'm sure you know already, and people do, the terminology is confusing. It is very, very confusing. So you can have a bioplastic that's made from a natural resource like corn or something like that, but you have to be careful of that as well. You know, in case forests have been cleared, you know, to plant this crop that's going to make your bioplastic. But the biodegradable ones, I think it's an interesting question, but I would imagine myself, if I was putting a solution into a dish that's biodegradable, I'd be wondering if the cells I have in there are degrading the plastic as well. You know? So I don't know enough about that, but I think it's interesting. But there is, someone else was mentioning gloves. Well, actually the very last person, Catherine, you were mentioning gloves as well. Gloves were the top item, along with some of the, what was the top item there on my polypropylene? I can't remember which thing it was, tubes, I think. They, like 119 of the 147 people that responded said gloves, you know, number one, but then it was the same number for, I think it was tubes, but one of the polypropylene items. Gloves are a big problem, but there is a company selling biodegradable gloves, and they're actually green. Now, I haven't managed to get through the process of making them a customer in NUIG so that I can buy off them, you know, and all that. And I haven't gone to the end of that process, but I think that's very interesting. And if people remind me, if you email me, I'll send the information. If you don't, is anyone using the green gloves? No? Have you heard of them? Yeah, I think they're kind of interesting, very, very interesting. And it's a good marketing thing. I'm really interested to hear, Tallulah, about your, the use of just the ordinary rubber gloves, you know, like I'm sure there are versions of that might be acceptable in the main lab, like that sort of thing. And this is what we hope would happen in the Irish Green Labs network, that people will be willing to share their good practices, you know, and those kinds of ideas. We'll have a space there for people to share those kinds of ideas, because I think that's really interesting. And we probably could seriously cut down if people would consider, you know, if it's acceptable to wash, you know, your gloves like you do at home. You wash them with a detergent and then you take them off and dry them. Like, that's such a simple thing to do for a top item that we're using in the lab. So I thought that's really interesting. Sorry, I could keep talking like just continuously until you stop me. But I really love the stories. I think they're fantastic. And I'm so impressed, right? I'm so impressed. And I think that Michelle's idea to have the competition, if that was Michelle's idea, I presume it was, but correct me if I'm wrong, but that competition that sort of incentivized people to think about their labs, I thought that was a fantastic idea, and we should do something similar at NUIG. I think, judging by the number of labs that are at this meeting and that actually have started Green Lab certification, I'm getting really concerned that you're starting to beat NUIG at this game. Because I am not getting that kind of uptake, I can tell you. I'm trying. I mean, I tell you what has happened is that we have it as part of the NUIG strategy for 2020 to 2025 to certify all our labs on campus by 2025. So it's going to be a race between us and you, I think, to see if we can do that. But I'm seriously impressed by the number of different labs. So that's one question I had for you, Katie, was how many different labs then at Trinity are actually started on Green Lab certification at the moment, do you know?
So our competition, we had a large number of applications in the Faculty of STEM and the Faculty of Health Science. Lena ran Health Science and I ran the STEM one. We could only take the top 4 shortlisted and only sponsored the top 2, so one in teaching and one in undergraduate. We're hoping that maybe if we have funding, we can run again in the future. Health Science sponsored their top 2 also, but I'll leave Lena chat about that because she knows far more about health science.
Yeah, I mean, I think
the answer I'd have to give is that I actually don't know, because obviously, like, there's a lot of people who are they're all at different stages. Like the competition last week was just to get some new labs involved, but like so many people are involved, and I don't even know if that is collated anywhere. I'm sure it is somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to know. I just think it's really interesting because, you know, it's a piece of information that we can share on the network and say, look, there are 10 labs at Trinity or whatever. You know, I mean, there are 10 participants in that survey. I'm very grateful to them. but it shows that there's interest in those different labs, you know, and I think it's really.
I think the website that you mentioned there during your talk, that's going to be kind of more national. I think that's going to be a fantastic way to share information and
really hope so,
and everything, you know.
Yeah. I really hope so. So it'll be sort of a safe place, you know, no one has to share anything they don't want to share, you know, there's no pressure kind of thing. And then we actually meet, it's grown out of SEAI's Public Sector Lab Working Group, and, you know, we meet every quarter at least. And it's a really good group because, like yourselves, it's like you, except an expanded version, because everyone's really motivated, and, you know, everyone's on board already or they wouldn't be going to the meetings. So you don't have to waste your breath trying to get people on board, you know, because they're on board. So I think it's really helpful, and people are fantastic at sharing what they want to do, you know.
And just to finish up, because I know we're over time, which always happens with me, so apologies.
That's okay. I don't mind staying on. I can.
One final question that came from the audience.
Yeah.
What if their labs don't fit neatly into the kind of labs that we were talking about today? What would you do with a computer science lab? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, you see, I think I don't, but there is some stuff out there if you go looking for it, because like I was invited to review a paper, first time ever as a Green Lab person, in October, I think it was, and it was a paper from the Journal of Computational Biology, I think it was, and they talked about data and things like that. So I mean, there is a narrative out there definitely about servers and you know, emails, and I really need to get to the bottom of that, because I'm not sure how accurate it is, or especially this idea that you should be deleting all your emails. I honestly don't know if that's really a thing, or if it's something that's just flown around social media, you know. But with computer science, I just don't have the knowledge for that. But what I think it'll be interesting from your group, because you've got pharmacology, you know, you've got zoology, you've got physics, which is really interesting to me, because we certainly haven't anyone in physics engaged in this process at all, is to do a comparison within the different disciplines that have labs. You know, like Tallulah, again, getting back to you with zoology is really interesting because you've all those tanks. And my question then was, oh, I wonder how the tanks compare to our -80 freezers, you know. And now, of course, where we are in Gorman, we up-chilled them, as a new verb I hadn't heard of, but we up-chilled them to -70, right? And you save on the newer freezers, maybe 10 to 15% of the energy. On the older ones, maybe a third, you know, it depends. But I know you were probably dealing with Rachel, were you? Whoever's Rachel Ralph, yeah, she's fantastic. And she's brilliant on the chemistry. She's top notch on the chemistry from her background. But she gives a guest lecture into our Green Lab module. And she gives that slide, you know, where she says, oh, that freezer, it's like a domestic house. You know, that each of these freezers is the electricity from a domestic house for a year, you know, the average, you know. So it made me wonder about those tanks. How do they compare to freezers? Maybe they're the same, because they do sound like they're pretty heavy, but you're not trying to go to -70, you know, but at the same time, it's kind of similar. You have other things you're trying to do. So it's interesting. And that's the kind of knowledge we need. And I think having simple things like, someone was saying we don't know the energy draw. It might have been Mike. Sorry, Mclaughlin. Where are you? I'm taking notes, but what's missing for people in the labs is exactly that, the awareness of what's happening. James, it was you were mentioning things being switched off. There's a story I heard from a group I was talking to in Glasgow last week, and they said that a Chinese researcher, a PhD student, was in their lab, and what they noticed was that she was going around the lab and turning off everything when she left, before she would leave at home. Stuff that could go off. And apparently it was because she'd come from a lab in China where the PI is charged for the electricity that's used, the excess electricity. So I thought that was fascinating, you know. So, I mean, it's almost like you need to wake up a lot of the PIs, because in some ways the PIs very variable, you know, in terms of being on board in principle, but, you know, busy, that sort of thing. So like,
we would kind of come across some of that as well, where you have like the electricity bill is centralized in Trinity. It's not sent out, and the same with all of the services. So, and what kind of level of institutional support or kind of innovations on an institutional level did you have in Galway?
I would say, do you know this idea of the money? To me, I know you're all saying, oh, well, we can't afford it. I really think the money is there, because that is not a lot of money. So let's say you've paid the admin fee for Trinity for this year, right? And then after that, it is peanuts we're talking about, really.
Yeah.
You know, so there's absolutely no way that any lab shouldn't be able to come up with, you know, $350. I mean, seriously, you pay twice that for an antibody, you know, in that it's so to me, it's not a financial impediment. That shouldn't be there as even a discussion, as far as I'm concerned. And so that's why when you talk, that's always my narrative to the senior people. I just go, this isn't expensive. You know, that's my starting point. You know, it's not like, oh, we need to come up with the money. But, you know, in terms of my senior support, I do still acknowledge that I did get buy-in before I even started. So the director of Quorum, who Mike knows, I mean, the director of Quorum, then the director of the building I was in. So because there are 30 different PIs in that research building, I didn't want to have to go and beg each of them for €100, which is what it was going to be, you know. I went to the registrar and to the bursar and asked them to pay for it up front, you know.
And even to add to that, even
Sorry?
to add to what you were saying, I agree with you. I think, you know, the €300 cannot be the showstopper. Yeah. And I think what is important as well is, okay, this is a fee, but then, you know, the cost through time, it's not necessarily really a cost. I mean, here it's about behavior. Right. It's about changing your behavior. And if you change your behavior, then everything falls from there. So on the long run, there will be a save, because if you start switching off the light, or even in consumables, if you start using them in a certain way, I mean, there will be a save on the long term. And this is a strategy. You can't think
exactly. And we need to gather that data. That's what's missing for us.
Yes, I agree.
You know, I think it's all very well to look at the information in other countries, which is there, you know, in the US, and my Green Lab is very good at gathering that data. The LEAF network, you know, in the UK as well, you know, there's information there. But it's almost like you need to find your local, you have to express it in local terms. What's going on in your lab? You know, what equipment are you using? What's the plug load of your lab, and how can you reduce it? You know, what's it costing in terms of GHGs? And what I'd love to see is how, if the experiments, instead of, you know, just describing this is our materials and methods, you know, getting up there, giving a presentation, this is our materials and methods, blah, 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 blah. This is the carbon footprint of what I just did, right? You know, and this is the thing I said to SFI, I said, you have to be careful if you are pushing people to reduce their carbon footprint. They will save money, you know, like whatever cost it is about getting glassware, it's nothing like what you're going to save if you implement all of these things, in my opinion, right? Because people will just waste less. Then you have more money to spend on carbon generating research. Do you know what I mean? So it's called the rebound effect, you know, in climate action, you know, it's called the rebound effect, and we have to be careful of that. So maybe SFI should be funding less carbon producing, you know, a portion, increase the proportion. And I was going to say health sciences, but the health sector generates a huge amount. But it's just more to make people aware, I think, of what's going on, you know. But your behavior thing, Gaia, George Marshall in the UK, that outreach organization, just go there, you're going to love it. And his book, Don't Even Think About It, why human brains are wired to ignore climate change. Fantastic book. Okay, honestly, perfect. He's a brilliant speaker. Like, if I had more slides, I would have put in a link. There's little short videos of him talking about engaging, how you engage people when you're talking about the climate, and you have to engage their emotions. You have to engage their emotions. You have to talk about their local environment. Do you see what I mean?
So I promise this would be the last question, just one. Sorry, and we're done, I promise, because I know.
No, I don't mind. I like
one question from Philip from the audience. He was wondering that, do you think providing an individual trace system for each lab that to identify excess use of disposables would encourage more sustainable behavior and reduce our reliance on plastic?
Absolutely. That's why I think if we can get some level of transparency, and I do believe that Ireland is well placed for this, because we're very well connected. I mean, everyone, let's face it, in the lab community really does know everybody else in the lab community, certainly within their disciplines, you know. So we're very, very well networked. We'll be even better networked with this Irish Green Labs thing. So yes, I do think that providing individual traceability for labs to identify excessive use is a fantastic way to go. And so that's why this plastic weighing exercise, I know that now it is difficult because everyone's on shifts, at least in our building. The researchers are only in for a short length of time. They're trying to cram in all their day's work. So for me to come along and say, oh yeah, well, would you mind also weighing your plastic? And not only that, but would you mind picking it through at the end of the day and telling me what catalogue numbers they are, which supplier, you know? So it is kind of a big ask, but if it's feasible at all to even do some parts of that, ideally one week's worth, great. We can see what the variability is. I know in our lab, cell cultures get fed on a Monday and a Friday, or a Thursday and a Monday or whatever. So you see things, you know, but to me, that's, the thing that gets me with the lab supplies is that we've umpteen lab supply companies delivering practically identical items that differ from each other very, very marginally, and it's just not that efficient. And I think we need to get on top of that, basically. And the ACT label that Peter, was it you who was mentioning the ACT label? I think the ACT label is fantastic. It's really brilliant. So when you're engaging with reps, you need to say, where's your ACT label? Why don't you have an ACT label on this? Because they come to our buildings and they're trying to sell stuff to us. So this is what we have to say to them. You know, this is good enough.
I think everyone's so enthusiastic about the topic, and I think I'll put you all in contact after this, because I'm sure there's far more questions for you, and especially as everyone's on different parts of their journey. So we'll be following up with you. I just that everyone can take in the lessons learned from today. And I just want to thank you and all of the panel members and all of the attendees for sticking with us, even though we're a bit over. So thank you all for your interest and the appetite, because it's clearly there. Yeah. And have a lovely weekend, everyone. And thank you to Lena, as always, doing all the background work.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.